Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, there we go. Thank you to everyone for being here today. I want to talk about a couple of different things, and as we move forward on some of these issues, I try and keep things in perspective. And I'm blessed to have three wonderful children, and they have a good life. But I know everyone does not have that opportunity. So when I look and I think and I watch and more importantly listen, whether it's Mike Ranzenhofer or Joe Griffo or Tom O'Mara or any of our colleagues, Kathy Marchione, Elaine Phillips, everyone comes at this from a personal perspective, not only in terms of their personal lives, but their professional lives as well. So today, you're going to hear from a number of our colleagues on an issue that is so extraordinarily important, and it's probably, we can talk about tax cuts, we can talk about workers' compensation, we can talk about a variety of different issues, but opioid and heroin addiction is probably the biggest scourge of our time recently. Senator Phil Boyle, 2014, in a space of less than 6 weeks, I think, held at least 11 or 12 hearings around the state. The Senate took very strong action on a variety of different bills, and I'm very gratified to say that effective this year, and I see a bunch of advocates sitting in the audience, if we sat with the advocates 4 or 5 years ago and said, we're going to make over $200 million investment on a variety of different things, everyone would have said, no, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to work. But it did. And I'm very gratified to say that you see a number of our colleagues here. Jimmy Tedisco, who spent 34 years in the New York State Assembly, caring very deeply about these issues. This is real life. It's real life. And I'm going to mention a few names that I know. This year I had a chance to honor Linda Ventura, who's a constituent of mine, as a woman of distinction who lost her son 5 years ago. I have a good friend named Chris Modeleski, whose son passed away this year, who was the same age as my son. Same age as my son, and these kids knew each other. Kids, they're young adults, but they're always going to be our children. So all these different things matter. We have done a variety of different things, and you're going to hear from our colleagues, but I think the last leg of the chair, if you will, whether it's Senator Seward, Senator Murphy, Roback, Senator Jacobs, Helming, everyone cares about this stuff. And the people who work in the field, let me say thank you. Let me say thank you for who you are, what you do, how you do it, the frequency of which you do it, and add one other thing. We have to go after, I'm going to make this very New York simple, and then I'm going to have Senator Amador speak. We have to go after the bad guys. We can do everything in the world about insurance and treatment and recovery, all of which is important. But if we don't go after the perpetrators and punish them swiftly and severely, it doesn't matter, because the bad guys are always going to be out there. We need to provide the requisite tools for law enforcement and make sure that families understand, yes, if my child is an extremist, even as an adult, that they'll get proper care. And equally as important, everyone should be able to say, I know that whether it's a sheriff or a police officer or the FBI or the DEA, whatever it is, that they have the requisite tools. So we have an aggressive package that I think is extraordinarily important. With that, I'd like to introduce, and I really want to thank him in advance, Senator Amador, who is co-chair of our task force. You know, sometimes people think, oh, they have a task force and stuff like this. This task force and these members, albeit brand new or people with seasoned experience, care very deeply about these issues. Senator Amador.
Thank you, Leader. And we appreciate everyone being here, and I want to thank all of the members of the Senate Task Force on Heroin and Opiate Addiction, as well as I want to thank our co-chairs, Senator Fred Akshar and Senator Chris Jacobs, for an outstanding job in helping, leading the way. No question, many of you in this room know the great work that we have done in recent years. And I thank all the members, again, of the Senate Task Force that had led the way in accomplishing a great deal of initiatives and fighting for more funding and advocating on a multi-pronged approach that we have benefited, I think, great dearly in the state of New York. I believe the state of New York is in a much better position than it was in prior years in fighting this scourge of opiate addiction. We all know someone in our community. We all face the ugliness of hearing overdose deaths, of seeing our emergency rooms or treatment facilities filled with individuals who are going through withdrawal and detox. And we know that we had in the state of New York problems in the past with this issue. New York was not prepared in facing this crisis. I believe today New York is much more prepared, and I want to thank everyone for bringing that. You know, when you look at the record funding, as Senator Flanagan mentioned, about $214 million that is being dedicated in the state budget to help this front. That is astonishing. It's a great investment. If you look at what we've done in increasing prevention, funding prevention, but not only that, requiring doctors who prescribe opiates, pain pills, to go on to carry on their continuing education. It's making a difference because now they'll understand that pain management medication, what the effect really is and what it will cause. It does make a difference on prevention. When you look at what we have done on the treatment, making treatment more affordable and making it more accessible. We went out to Senator O'Mara last year's district, and to find that Yates County really has to go one or two counties, the residents there have to go to one or two counties away just to get some access for recovery services or treatment services. We just thought that was unacceptable, and we have worked on that, and we are increasing the affordability and the accessibility to treatment. And when you look at the strong investment that we made in recovery services, this is one of the key, I believe, measures of the multi-pronged approach that we can invest in, is on the recovery side. Because when there is a loved one who is bound by addiction, who's held by the stronghold in their life, to overcome that addiction, that craving, that uncontrollable desire that they have to use more. Once they overcome that addiction and they get into the recovery aspect and phase, the most important thing that we can do as neighbors, good neighbors, is to help them, to keep them in recovery. And that is a lifelong journey. So, with the amount of efforts that we have placed in the recovery services in the state of New York, we believe this will make a big difference. But also with the multi-pronged approach of prevention, of treatment, and of recovery, the fourth prong is enforcement. And that is the last key point that we believe in the New York State Senate will go a long way. Because all of the investments that we've made, the services, the progress that have been made and invested in, will all be for naught if we don't go after the supply and go after the big business drug dealers who are mixing this poison and putting it on the street for higher and bigger profits for their own gain. When they prey on the most innocent or the most vulnerable in society who is bound by an addiction that they were not born with, I think it's time that we increase the law enforcement awareness. And it is time that we take some bold steps One of the bills in the comprehensive package of bills that we'll have today in the Senate will focus on the enforcement side. You know, many of the bills are expected to pass, but one particular bill is that I sponsor is Lurie's Law. And we all know a familiar face around the state capitol because of the tenacity that Patty Farrell has had in this effort. And Lurie was Patty Farrell's daughter, who again was very vulnerable and very bound by an addiction that took Lurie's life. Patty did not stay home and sulk over the great loss. She was courageous and strong and wants to make a difference in the state of New York and advocates very strongly on Lurie's Law. So I want to thank you, Patty, for being here. We have passed this bill, Lurie's Law, many times in the state Senate. It's time that we have the Assembly on board to make a difference, because what Lurie's Law will do is it will allow and give the law enforcement agencies the tools and the mechanism to now go after and charge these big drug dealers, these big business drug dealers, with homicide, if in fact there's an overdose death and they're selling an opiate product. So I think that will make a big difference. Lurie's Law, combined with other enforcement measures that the Senate is going to bring to the floor today, will go a long way in stopping the flow of these deadly drugs in our communities. And we are very fortunate also to have someone as a co-chair of the Senate Task Force here who understands and knows all too well the hurdles that law enforcement can face when they try to deal with the scourge of heroin on our streets. So it is my great pleasure to now introduce co-chair of the Senate Task Force, Senator Fred Akshar.
Thank you very much, Senator Amador. As I say often, this is a community issue that requires a community's response. So first, allow me to say thank you to the community-based providers, the people who are on the front lines every single day. Thank you for everything that you do. I have the greatest admiration for the work that you want to do on a daily basis. Majority Leader Flanagan, thank you for your leadership and your commitment on this particular issue and allowing this to remain at the forefront of the Majority Conference's priorities. This is a real-life issue. This is a quality-of-life issue that affects so many New Yorkers, regardless of where you live, and the Majority Conference remains committed to it, and we remain leaders in dealing with this. My co-chairs, the greatest honor since being elected is serving in this particular role as a co-chair of the Senate's Task Force on Heroin and Opioid Addiction. I'm proud of the progress that we made last year. I think we made great strides. However, we're still losing people at an alarming rate. We continue to lose a generation of people, so that sends a very clear message that we have additional work to do. I would respectfully offer that this is the most pervasive issue that our communities are facing, whether you're in the North Country or in Western New York, you're in New York City or in Binghamton. And this is personal to me. It truly is. As a former member of law enforcement, I spent too much time looking into the eyes of parents who were weeping and crying because they lost their loved ones. And as you well know, I spent plenty of time working in an undercover capacity, trying to deal with these particular issues and focus my energy and attention on enforcement with a great team of people who are committed to this. And we have taken a multifaceted approach. We have dealt with prevention, education, treatment, and recovery. We passed one of the most comprehensive packages of bills last year, but I stand here at this podium today extremely disappointed because the Assembly only took up half of those. And we can have this discussion about criminal justice reform. We can have this discussion about overpopulation in prisons. We can have those discussions. But for some reason, any piece of legislation that carries an enhanced penalty for dealing drugs doesn't gather the attention of the Assembly. And that is crazy, that is irresponsible, and it's unacceptable. Protecting our communities from this opioid addiction is not a partisan issue. You've all heard me say that many times. There is no time to play politics while young people across our great state are dying. I would offer that we should be acting together, and we should be acting now. Senator Flanagan spoke about the record investment. I think that's great, but we do have, in fact, a series of bills that will hold people accountable. And we need leaders in the Assembly to wake up. I'm going to say it again. The people in the other house need to wake up and recognize that this is an incredibly big issue that requires action. They need to do their part in driving drug dealers out of our communities, make access to poison harder, not easier. Our constituents depend on us. Patty, you depend on us to get these things accomplished. And so today, in conclusion, I make my position very clear, that I am challenging the Assembly to put people before politics. It's with great pleasure that I introduce the third co-chair of the Senate's Task Force on Heroin and Opioid Addiction, Senator Chris Jacobs.
Good morning, everyone. Honored to be here today, and Senator Flanagan, thank you again for appointing me to be a co-chair this year with Senator Amador and Senator Akshar. Truly an honor, and I have been trying to become more knowledgeable on this issue, which, like every other area of the state, has been devastating to Western New York. I represent the city of Buffalo and areas around there. I first want to echo Senator Akshar to thank everyone who has been involved on the front line in this fight in terms of treatment and prevention, law enforcement, and advocates that have suffered so much, parents and family members. I've been so profoundly impacted by parents who've come up and by their stories, and also their generosity and sacrifice to be able to endure telling the story over and over again in an effort to assure that this pain doesn't come to another family member, and you are making a difference. Buffalo, New York, in Western New York, last year, 300 people died due to a heroin overdose. That is probably 3 times what it was several years ago. And keep in context that dramatic increase in the city of Buffalo alone, they instituted Narcan 1,000 times last year. So those lives were saved, or a lot of those were saved. Imagine what would have been done and the devastation if that wasn't an option. I am honored to be involved, and I am optimistic, even though we're in the throes of this battle. I am optimistic because, as I mentioned, those in treatment, those in prevention, those in law enforcement, I don't think I've ever seen any other crisis where those different sectors have worked hand in hand together and understood the perspective of one and the other really working together. And I just think that bodes so well for this fight. I'm honored to be involved in several of the bills that are going to be introduced in the next day. During the week of the budget, we lost 8 lives in Buffalo, New York alone, and that was due to fentanyl, the introduction of fentanyl, this deadly component they've been putting in heroin. We're going to be doing something about that, about holding those accountable who are peddling that, and it's nearly an instant death sentence to those that are taking that. Another bill that I believe Senator Amador is offering today. A couple years ago, I used to go to a coffee shop in Buffalo, and I was talking to a member of law enforcement who went there as well, and I said, it's interesting. Every time I go, there's a large groups meeting there, and you know what they're meeting about? And he said, no, yeah, there's a methadone clinic across the street. So they go, and then they come and convene together and talk together. I said, that's great. And he said, yeah, well, one thing that's terrible is the drug dealers are all around there trying to prey upon them as they're walking in to get their treatment. And I was thinking to myself, boy, there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law for somebody that's doing that, and also hopefully a special place in hell for that. But today we are offering a law. So we can do one point. So I know law enforcement and penalties are one component, but they are an important component. Happy to be involved on that element today and all the others moving forward. Thank you again for the opportunity.
So I think back in the early part of my tenure in the Senate, people, not the people in this room, but people used to make fun of me because I had a bill involving synthetic marijuana and K2, essentially all of which was legal. People said this is ridiculous, you shouldn't be doing this, and our argument was that all of this stuff, they're gateway drugs at some point, shape, or form. Interestingly enough, the co-sponsor of the legislation that I was involved in was Carl Hastie, the Speaker. And I don't want to suggest for a New York moment that he doesn't care, but we come at this from a slightly different orientation in terms of how we address these problems. And I remember working very closely with our staff. And our staff would opine that we would craft legislation and do the right thing. But like that, as soon as we did it, as I referred to them before, as the bad guys, they figured out how to get around the law. So every time we move, they react, which is why it is so important for us to be vigilant. Now, I'm going to make a slight distinction. I can speak to the virtues of every one of my colleagues who are standing up here and the diversity of their backgrounds. Senator Murphy has 3 children. He and I talk about education all the time. He worries every single day about his kids. Kathy Marchione is a grandmother. Elaine Phillips has 3 lovely young daughters. Sue Serino is a mom, and now I'm going gender. I'm just going to be, and that's G-E-N-D-E-R, to be clear, all right? I'm going gender. There's nothing more important than being a mom. Nothing more important. The sanctity of that should never be overlooked. So I know Rich Funke cares, Senator Griffo, Marty Golden, based on law enforcement background. We have former law enforcement people, Senator Golden, Senator O'Mara, Senator Bonisic, Mike Ranzenhofer, who actually practices law. So our experience, Senator Akshar, of course, that colors our judgment in a good way. So we will be out there, we'll be aggressive, we will do the people's business, and we look for your support in every way, shape, and form. And I think Senator Akshar crystallized where we are. Between now and June 21st, that can be an absolute eternity in Albany. But that does not mean for 1 second that we can't get the people's business done.